Hey friends, 25 men, one woman, all in the span of 24 hours. Deep in the heart of ancient Rome, inside a dimly lit brothel cell tucked away in the city's most dangerous district, an unbelievable competition was underway. The Empress of the most powerful empire on earth had just challenged Rome's most legendary prostitute, all to see who could satisfy more men before the sun came up. The prize wasn't money. The reward wasn't status. This was something else entirely, a contest of pure, raw endurance. And what the Empress did that night would end up sealing her fate forever. Her name was Valeria Messalina. By day, she ruled beside her husband, the emperor. But by night, she was known to work as a common prostitute. And when she finally took things one step too far, her execution would come so swiftly that historians still argue about it. Were the stories about her even humanly possible? Or were they the most devastating character assassination ever put to paper? What you are about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about power, about sex, and about ancient Rome. Before we pull back the curtain on what really happened behind those palace walls, make sure you're subscribed, because what's coming is going to completely change how you see the ancient world. And go ahead and hit that like button if you've ever wondered just how much of ancient history is real and how much is just propaganda. Comment below with which part of this story shocks you the most. We're about to reveal details that even seasoned historians find almost impossible to believe. What you're about to hear isn't from just one place. It comes from multiple ancient sources. Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, and Pliny the Elder. All of them were writing within decades of these events, when people who saw it with their own eyes were still alive. Modern forensic historians have spent centuries just trying to untangle the facts from the political smears. The truth they've uncovered is somehow both less extreme and even more fascinating than the legends would have you believe. The year is 38 CE, and Rome is the center of the known world. Its marble temples gleam bone white under the Mediterranean sun. But down the shadowed corridors of the imperial palace, something much darker is taking shape. The Emperor Caligula's reign has spiraled into complete madness. Executions are a daily event. Paranoia poisons every single conversation, and the only way to survive is to make yourself seem completely harmless, totally irrelevant, practically invisible. In one of the palace's less prestigious wings lives Claudius, the emperor's uncle. He's 47 years old, and everything about him just screams weakness. He stutters whenever he gets nervous. He drags one leg when he walks. Saliva sometimes escapes his mouth when he tries to speak. For decades, his own family has treated him like an embarrassment, hiding him away from public view, assuming he's just too simple-minded for the world of politics. This very assumption is what will end up saving his life. Across the city, in a grand mansion fit for Rome's oldest aristocracy, lives a 15-year-old girl named Valeria Messalina. She's a descendant of Augustus's own sister, which makes her blood about as blue as it gets in Rome. Ancient writers describe her as beautiful dark hair, pale skin, features that perfectly matched the Roman ideal. But the thing that strikes people most about her isn't her beauty. It's her intensity. When she looks at you, you feel like you're being examined, evaluated, and judged. She is intelligent, deeply ambitious, and she's about to have her entire future decided for her without anyone bothering to ask her opinion. Marriages among Rome's elite were never about love. They were about alliances, about bloodlines, about gaining a political advantage. So when Caligula decides to marry Messalina off to his embarrassing uncle Claudius, nobody thinks it matters all that much. Claudius will never be emperor, so this marriage just keeps Messalina close to the palace, producing children with imperial blood, and it solves a minor political headache. The girl herself has no say in any of it. One day, she's simply told she will marry a man 3 decades older than her, a man she finds physically repulsive, and that's the end of it. Her wedding night, at just 15 years old, to a drooling, stuttering man in his late 40s, it must have been traumatic in ways the ancient sources never even acknowledge, because Roman culture didn't really see female consent as particularly important. Then just 3 years later, everything changes. Caligula is assassinated by his own guards in 41 CE. Chaos just erupts in the city. Who will be the next emperor? As soldiers storm through the palace, they find Claudius hiding behind a curtain, trembling with fear. Almost as a joke, they pull him out and proclaim him emperor. Suddenly, impossibly, the man everyone had dismissed as an idiot is now the ruler of the greatest empire in history. And Valeria Messalina, barely 18 years old, becomes the Empress of Rome. Little did anyone know, this teenage empress would soon become the most notorious woman in all of Roman history. Her name would be forever linked with sexual excess so extreme that 2,000 years later, we are still talking about it. Just try to imagine yourself in Messalina's position for a moment. You're 18. Your husband is the emperor, but he's also nearly 50, physically unappealing, and by all accounts, not particularly interested in sex. You have unlimited wealth, command over thousands of servants, and access to anything and everything Rome has to offer. You've already given him 2 children, which has secured your position. So what do you do with absolute power and complete, mind-numbing boredom? According to the ancient sources, Messalina began slipping out of the palace at night. She would put on a blonde wig to hide her dark hair, dress in the clothes of an ordinary woman, and just disappear into the streets of Rome, with only one trusted attendant by her side. The palace guards noticed, of course, but they said nothing. I mean, what could they say? She was the Empress. Confronting her could easily mean execution. So where was she going? To the Suburra, Rome's infamous red light district, a place where prostitutes worked out of tiny cells and sailors from across the empire came looking for a good time. Tacitus and Suetonius both report that Messalina actually worked in a brothel under the name Lysiska, which means she-wolf. She would pay the brothel owner for the privilege of just using one of the rooms. And she serviced clients who had no earthly idea they were sleeping with the Empress of Rome. The psychological complexity of this is just staggering. This wasn't something she was forced into. She was paying to do it. This wasn't about financial desperation. She commanded the wealth of an entire empire. According to the sources, she sometimes charged the normal rates for a prostitute, and other times she just worked for free. The motivation wasn't money. It was something else. If you're shocked by what you're hearing, you should probably hit that like button, because the contest with the 25 men is coming up. And it is somehow even more unbelievable than what we've covered so far. Back at the palace, Messalina played the part of the dignified empress perfectly during the daylight hours. She attended state functions right beside Claudius. She received foreign dignitaries with all the appropriate seriousness. She managed the affairs of the imperial household with stunning efficiency. Nobody watching her at these official events would ever suspect that just hours later, she'd be down in the subura, serving anonymous clients in a prostitute's cell. But Messalina wasn't content with just anonymous encounters. The ancient sources describe increasingly elaborate parties at the palace that crossed every single line of Roman propriety. She started hosting what can only be described as orgies, gatherings where senators and their wives would perform sexual acts in front of each other, often at Messalina's direct instruction. And these weren't exactly voluntary. When the Empress invites you to a party, saying no could be seen as disrespect or even treason. Guests would arrive nervous and leave compromised, bound to Messalina through a shared sense of guilt and shame. The guest lists read like a who's who of Rome's power structure. There were senators looking for favor, generals who needed military appointments, merchants who wanted lucrative contracts. Once they had participated in one of Messalina's parties, she owned them. They couldn't dare oppose her without risking the exposure of their own behavior. It was blackmail through hedonism, and politically it was remarkably effective. Claudius somehow remained completely oblivious, or maybe he just chose to remain ignorant. His freedman advisors, these were former slaves who had risen to positions of enormous power. They watched Messalina carefully, gathering evidence, just waiting for the right moment. Narcissus and Pallas, the two most powerful men in the empire after Claudius himself, understood that Messalina was a threat to the empire's stability. But moving against an empress required perfect timing and completely unquestionable proof. The preparations for a disaster were being made on all sides, though nobody seemed to realize it yet. Then came the competition that would make Messalina a legend for 2 millennia. Pliny the Elder, writing in his Natural History just a few decades after Messalina's death, describes it as if it were just a simple fact. Messalina challenged Scylla, Rome's most famous prostitute, to see which of them could satisfy more men in 24 hours. Just picture the scene. 2 women, one an empress in disguise, the other a professional courtesan, engaging in what might just be history's most bizarre contest. According to Pliny and the sources that quote him, both women worked through an entire day and an entire night. The specific numbers vary a little bit across the different sources. Some say it was 25 men, others claim the count went even higher, but the one consistent claim is that Messalina won, and she won easily, still looking for more partners when Scylla finally admitted defeat. The sheer physical logistics of this are almost unbelievable. 25 men in 24 hours means a new partner every single hour, with no breaks for food or sleep or recovery. From a medical perspective, this would cause severe tissue damage and utter exhaustion. So did it really happen exactly this way? Many modern historians are skeptical, but the story shows up in multiple, independent ancient sources. This suggests that, at the very least, Romans believed their empress had done something extraordinarily scandalous involving sexual excess and a public competition with prostitutes. What on earth drives someone to this? Modern psychology might diagnose something like hypersexuality disorder, a condition where sexual thoughts become intrusive and compulsive, where behavior just keeps escalating despite the negative consequences, where normal satisfaction becomes impossible to achieve. The pattern perfectly matches what the sources describe about Messalina. She was constantly seeking more, never satisfied, her behavior escalating over time, unable to stop despite the obvious dangers. Roman medicine had no framework for understanding psychological conditions. They would have attributed excessive female sexual desire to hysteria, supposedly caused by the womb wandering through the body. A Roman doctor examining Messalina would have just prescribed some herbs or dietary changes, completely missing any underlying psychological issues. She was trapped in patterns of behavior she might not have understood or been able to control, living in a culture that had no treatment and certainly no sympathy. Back at the palace, Messalina's behavior was becoming impossible to hide. Too many people knew. Rumors were spreading through the streets of Rome. Common people gossiped about seeing the Empress in the Subura. Senators who had been to her parties whispered to each other in dark corners. The scandal was becoming public knowledge, except, apparently, to Claudius himself, who was still isolated in his bubble of imperial information control. Narcissus and Pallas just watched and waited, building their case against her. Messalina had made enemies with every execution she ordered, every political rival she destroyed, every person she humiliated. And they were all just waiting for their chance to get revenge. The storm was gathering, and Messalina seemed completely unaware of the disaster that was speeding toward her. And then, impossibly, she made everything worse. In the year 48 CE, Messalina fell in love. Not with her husband, and not with her anonymous brothel clients, but with Gaius Silius, by all accounts the most handsome man in Rome. He was a senator, wealthy, charming, and very politically ambitious. Their affair wasn't a particular secret, But what happened next just defies any rational explanation. While Claudius was away at the port of Ostia overseeing grain shipments, Messalina married Silius in a public ceremony. You should read that again. She married another man while she was still married to the emperor. And this wasn't some secret tryst. This was a full traditional Roman wedding with witnesses, signed contracts, bridal attire, religious rituals, and hundreds of guests. Tacitus describes it as a huge celebration, complete with music and feasting, held right in Messalina's own gardens with senators and aristocrats in attendance. What could she possibly have been thinking? The sources suggest two possibilities. Either she had completely lost her grip on reality after years of escalating behavior, or she was actually attempting a coup, planning to make Silius the new emperor by replacing Claudius. Either explanation requires us to understand that Messalina had reached a point where normal risk assessment just no longer functioned for her. Imagine being a guest at that wedding. You get an invitation to the Empress's marriage ceremony, to someone who is not the emperor. Do you go? Refusing would be an insult to the Empress and would risk her legendary vindictiveness. But attending makes you a witness to what could only be considered treason. Either choice could mean your death. Many chose to attend. Maybe hopping Messalina's coup would succeed, and they would be rewarded for their loyalty. Or maybe they were just simply too terrified to say no. The celebration went on for hours. Music played, wine flowed. The bride and groom performed all the traditional rituals, including some mock religious ceremonies. Some sources even claim they consummated the marriage publicly, or at least in a theatrical way. This wasn't subtle political maneuvering. This was either madness or an incredibly bold power play. Then word reached Claudius at Ostia. His freedmen brought him reports that just seemed impossible. Your wife has married another man in a public ceremony, attended by half the Senate. At first, Claudius refused to believe it. They had to bring multiple witnesses and actually show him the signed marriage documents before he finally accepted that this was really happening. Narcissus understood instantly that this was the moment they had been waiting for. Messalina had finally given them the unquestionable justification they needed for her removal. He essentially staged a counter-coup to save Claudius from Messalina's coup, taking control of the Praetorian Guard and marching back toward Rome with troops. At the palace, Messalina just kept on celebrating, apparently unaware or uncaring that her entire world was about to end. The celebration stopped abruptly when messengers finally reached her with the news. Claudius was returning with the Praetorian Guard, and he knew everything. Reality came crashing down. The wine haze lifted. She sobered up instantly, understanding with perfect, chilling clarity what this meant. Execution. For herself, for Silius, for everyone who was connected to the wedding. In a desperate move, she tried one final manipulation. She gathered her children, Britannicus and Octavia, and she set out to meet Claudius before he entered the city, Hopping the sight of his wife and children would just melt his anger. It was the same kind of emotional manipulation that had worked for her for years. But this time, Narcissus intercepted her. He warned Claudius that seeing Messalina would destroy his resolve, that her beauty and her tears would undo his justified fury. He physically prevented the meeting from ever happening. Silius was the first to face execution. He didn't resist or beg for his life. He only asked for a swift death. He got it, beheaded that very same day. Guests from the wedding were hunted down systematically. Some were executed outright. Others were given the option of suicide, which in Rome just meant killing yourself before the soldiers did it for you. The purge swept through Rome's elite, erasing everyone and anyone connected to Messalina's final act of defiance. Messalina retreated to the gardens of Lucullus, an estate she had stolen years earlier through accusations and executions. Ironically, it would now become her tomb. With her was her mother, Lepida, who had been largely absent throughout Messalina's life, but was present now at the end. Ancient sources describe the young empress's mental state as wildly unstable, shifting between rage and despair, between panic and an eerie calm. She tried to write a plea to Claudius, but she couldn't find the words. She considered suicide, but she couldn't summon the courage. Fear paralyzed her, even with death just moments away. How do you even process falling from absolute power to a condemned prisoner in a single day? After 7 years of living exactly as she pleased, of bending the city of Rome to her will, she now just sat in a garden with nowhere left to run. Narcissus wasn't about to risk leaving her fate to Claudius's mercy. He knew that if the emperor saw her, if she wept and reminded him of their past, she just might survive. So he sent a tribune and a centurion with strict orders. Kill her immediately. They found Messalina with her mother, a dagger trembling in her hand. The tribune waited, giving her the chance to take her own life and die with some dignity. She couldn't do it. Even facing certain death, her courage failed her. Lepida urged her daughter to end it herself, rather than be executed like a common criminal. But Messalina just hesitated, frozen somewhere between pride and terror. Finally, the tribune lost his patience. He stepped forward and struck her down with his sword. Messalina died at 22 years old, in the very gardens she had stolen, killed by the same imperial machinery she had once commanded. Lepida stayed behind, performing one last act of maternal love, arranging her daughter's body, closing her eyes, restoring what little dignity death allowed. Then she disappeared from history entirely. Claudius was at dinner when messengers brought him the news of Messalina's death. According to Suetonius, he showed no emotion at all. He didn't ask how she died. He expressed neither grief nor satisfaction. He simply kept eating, then called for more wine, as if nothing particularly significant had happened. 2,000 years later, historians still debate what actually happened. The sources all have very clear biases. Tacitus, who was writing 50 years after these events, was a moralist who used Messalina as a cautionary tale about female depravity and imperial corruption. Juvenal was a satirist whose job was to exaggerate, not to be accurate. Suetonius loved scandalous gossip, regardless of whether it was verified. Pliny was just repeating stories he'd heard, rather than documenting events he had witnessed himself. Modern forensic historians have tried to separate the propaganda from the truth. The general consensus is that Messalina likely did engage in some scandalous sexual behavior. The general pattern of her life is probably real, because it led directly to her execution. But the specific details, working in a brothel, the 25-man competition, the exact nature of the palace orgies, those might be exaggerated or even invented entirely. Why would the sources exaggerate? Because after Messalina's death, Claudius married Agrippina the Younger, Nero's mother, who had her own agenda for controlling the historical narratives. Making Messalina look as terrible as possible made Agrippina look better by comparison. Most of the surviving sources were written during or after Nero's reign, when Agrippina's faction controlled what got recorded and what got buried. Feminist historians have asked some very uncomfortable questions about why Messalina's sexual behavior became so legendary, when male emperors did comparable or even worse things with much less historical condemnation. Caligula allegedly committed incest and rape. Nero would later force senators to watch him rape their own wives. Tiberius supposedly maintained a villa where he molested children. Yet Messalina's reputation as sexually depraved exceeds all of these men. Why? Because female sexual agency terrified Roman men more than male sexual violence ever did. A man exercising power through sex was seen as normal, even admirable in Roman culture. But a woman actively pursuing sexual pleasure for herself, controlling male bodies, choosing her own partners, this violated every single Roman assumption about proper gender roles. Messalina had to be destroyed, not just politically, but historically. She had to be turned into a cautionary tale that would frighten women away from sexual autonomy for centuries to come. What does Messalina's story really teach us? At its core, this is a story about how female sexuality has been policed, punished, and weaponized throughout history. When men abuse power sexually, it reinforces male dominance. But when women claim sexual agency, it challenges the entire gender hierarchy. The Roman sources couldn't tolerate that challenge, so they created a monster whose story would echo for millennia. But there's something else here, too. The question of truth versus propaganda. How much of what we know about history is really just the version that was written by the winners, by men, by those who controlled the narrative? Messalina left no writings of her own. We have no record of her perspective, her motivations, her own understanding of her behavior. We only have the accounts written by her enemies after she was dead and unable to defend herself. Think about what Messalina actually had: an arranged marriage at 15 to a man she found repulsive, no real power despite her title of Empress, and a society that gave women almost no acceptable outlets for ambition, intelligence, or sexual desire. If she did engage in extreme sexual behavior, might it have been the only form of power that was even available to her? The only way to feel in control of her own body and her own choices in a world where everything else was controlled by men. Her children paid the price for their mother's scandal. Britannicus was eventually poisoned by Nero. Octavia was forced to marry Nero, suffered through a miserable marriage, and was finally executed after he got tired of her. Both of them were forever tainted by their association with history's most infamous empress, and the men who orchestrated Messalina's downfall. Narcissus and Pallas accumulated vast fortunes and effectively ran the empire for years, their power secured by her removal. The speed of her fall is perhaps the most instructive part of this. One day she was empress, hosting public celebrations, apparently believing herself to be invincible. The next day she was dead. No trial, no chance to defend herself. The machinery of power just crushed her in a matter of hours. That's how precarious even the highest positions were in imperial Rome. You were only powerful for as long as someone more powerful allowed you to be. So, a 15-year-old girl's arranged marriage led to 7 years of scandal, a public bigamous wedding, and an execution at 22. Whether she really serviced 25 men in one night, or if that detail was just propaganda, we will never know for certain. What we do know is that her name became synonymous with female sexual excess for 2,000 years, that Roman sources created a monster to frighten women into obedience, and that the truth is probably far more complex and much more human than any of the legends suggest. If this story left you questioning everything you thought you knew about ancient history, then subscribe to this channel. We expose the uncomfortable truths that the textbooks always leave out. Hit that bell, because next time we're investigating Agrippina the Younger, the woman who married her own uncle, allegedly seduced her son, and became the most powerful woman in Rome through methods that make Messalina look almost innocent by comparison. Tell us in the comments what unsettled you the most. The 25-man competition, the public wedding to someone other than the emperor, or the realization that we'll never really know how much was true versus how much was character assassination. Drop your thoughts below. And if you want to understand how history has been weaponized against women for millennia, check out our entire series on history's most misunderstood women. Until next time, remember, history's darkest secrets aren't always what actually happened. Sometimes they're what people wanted you to believe happened. And that distinction matters more than you know.